Alright, another unedited video. Yeah, maybe I'll just save the editing for when I have more time. And I guess when I'm making some sort of really quality video. Just basically responds to the conversation about, again, objective, absolute morality, ethics, value. That's Nicotine made a video, and I like Nicotine, but it just seems like we're just starting over again. I mean, and maybe it's necessary, because apparently reading the comments on his video, apparently it is necessary. There's a ton of people who somehow aren't convinced that the welfare of sentient creatures is somehow related to the value equation. That it has something to do with the whole meaning of the universe having meaning, that somehow maybe it wouldn't have any if it wasn't for sentient creatures being in the mix, being vulnerable. And apparently that needs to be explained to them, that there's an absolute linear scale here, and you can put things on this scale of good, bad, positive, negative, and it's been proven beyond reasonable doubt. The argument has been made. The evidence indicates, it's circumstantial evidence, but it's powerful evidence. We all have it. We all personally experience it. We have eyewitness testimony in our own personal experience, and yet people will somehow argue that it's an illusion, that there is somehow in their convoluted perception some way to unravel the distinction between something in harsh, unpleasant, something in pain, and something experiencing delight or pleasure, and that in some in some illusion they can create in their brain, some model they can create in their brain, they can find some way to equalize those events and say there's no distinction between them. So anyway, it seems, if you ask somebody to explain something that's important in the universe that doesn't somehow affect the welfare, the state of being of a sentient creature, they can't do it. They're not going to be able to explain. There's nothing of meaning except impact on a sentient creature. Nothing else is relevant, meaningful, and it just doesn't matter. There's no morality or ethics, and I guess that's this. If you just reduce this to some sort of quantum perspective, like there is this quanta of value, and even if we generalize it and allow people the illusion of this idea of positive and negative, rather than just 0 and 10. But yeah, let's give them that illusion of positive and negative. It's obviously a performance issue. You want to maximize the positive and minimize the negative. It's just again a perfectly rational efficiency equation, and there's no reasonable alternative explanation. There's no way to undo the pure, simple, logical simplicity. There's no counter-argumentation to undo the reasonableness of recognizing that value equation. You don't do something the hard way. You do it the most efficient, direct way. You don't take the convoluted, idiotic path to get somewhere if the objective is getting somewhere. No, you find the straight line and you take the straight line. So it's pitiful to have to argue something that's just this. I hate that idea of using a word like intuitive, but something this obvious and something this impossible to counter-argue. There's just no way to rationally sanely, logically argue that sentient states that we would recognize as positive and negative have no distinction and no meaning. It's just nonsense. So yeah, that's what the game is. The game is maximizing this equation, optimizing our performance, our capacity to put as little harm into the equation and create as much of this positive, however you define it. And that, I guess, would be the second step, if we could get there, of the argument. And from each step, the lower steps become so obvious, it's difficult. I mean, standing on the top of the staircase looking down, I'm saying, how can people not see these stairs? I just climbed up them. They're right there. I can see it, the damn thing. It's got my footprint on it still. How the fuck do I have to explain that to these idiots? Justify it. And that's always sort of the problem with some logic, is that if you don't do the whole equation, the pieces of the equation look obtuse and strange and bizarre. But once you fit them into an equation, it works. And yeah, it just becomes quite obvious that what the value in the universe is sentience. There's no other value in the universe. There's no intelligence, would have no mission, no functionality, no anything, if something that feels couldn't be impacted. It's the whole game. And so then it's just defining the value of those feelings. You know, what negative is worth what positive. And then we can have that's the second step, maybe argument, is being able to dissect all this particle energy of value, all these bits of value, and maybe realize that, yeah, the matter is really made up of energy, and the energy is maybe made up of a quanta, a fundamental value. Because you can argue, I mean, obvious scenarios of efficiency. You know, you could have two people, and one of them could, you know, maybe to get off sexually, they'd have to rape and murder the woman. And the other guy, all he has to do is smell her perfume, and he's in ecstasy. You know, he's just, yeah, you know, that did it for him. You know, she had him at smell. Yeah, there's an efficiency there. I mean, this one guy gets there efficiently. The other guy gets there very inefficiently. He needs to consume a hell of a lot of misery and harm, you know, to get his satisfaction. And so, yeah, of course, I want to get into the argument about addiction and the fact that all this illusion of satisfaction is really just the mitigating against dissatisfaction. Much like addictions to nicotine or some other substance, it's not that you're chasing some good feeling. What you're really trying to do is eliminate this tension and negative feeling you get if you don't satisfy the addiction. This quietness that consumes you, and many ambitions are that way. People feel, you know, their ego is deflated and they feel inadequate or insufficient, you know, if they don't win their gold medal or whatever they're chasing. And they've now created a negative state in their own qualitative being, you know, because they haven't climbed Mount Everest. So now they must, you know, throw a whole bunch of investment of potential harm, you know, into the mix so they can satisfy this deprivation they're sensing. And, you know, one could, I think, if you dissect this nonsense, write an ethical equation that says this is highly inefficient nonsense. You know, I mean, ultimately, the moral thing to do would be for every high-consuming Westerner to blow their brains out just because they're so preposterously inefficient in acquiring their satisfaction in terms of how much resource they consume, how much exploitation labor they consume. to acquire their Prozac quieted perception of accomplishment. It's a joke. The piggery, how the inefficiency. We're clunkers, plain and simple. We're preposterous clunkers, lemons. You wouldn't buy us if we were a car, because the gas mileage is so pitiful. And so that's where this will go in terms of a moral or ethical question. And so then you get into this whole like Mr. Spock kind of argument can be made, and maybe the third or fourth step of the whatever you want to call this this progression of philosophical perspective is where you would start to analyze, well, what can be expected from human beings, what can be demanded of them versus what can be expected, requested. What level of moral demand can be placed on what thing. And I think quite obviously we've already established some of those. We've demanded that people not kill each other to satisfy their hunger for a bag of potato chips or some other nonsense. There's lots of little demands in there, but there could be lots more demands in terms of our efficiency, and that you can't go below a certain inefficiency without some penalty to your personal existence. And that's where this also comes in, there's only two parts to the equation, really. There's what you personally feel, whether you're generally a satisfied person or generally a dissatisfied person. That would include your life experience, like what kind of little horrors you went through. I mean, if I went through at some point in my life, say some 6-month period where I was just in constant writhing, horrible, awful pain, I mean, that would be a big, giant negative that would perhaps consume all efficiency for the rest of my personal existent life, in the sense that nobody would buy that life if they had to live those 6 months. And then the other side of the equation is your impact. What effect have you had on the other sentient creatures in our known universe? And it's always about the net equation. I mean, people keep talking like it's some sort of, profound thing to do. Is to ask a question like, well, what if, as if, because it's a complex interaction, that somehow that denies us an obligation to attempt to do the best we can. And because the scenario of value, as we can't know our exact impact, doesn't change the fact that we did have an exact impact. And we have to do the best we can, so we can see the obvious. I mean, we know when we're leaking oil. We know when we're reckless. We know when the machinery is defective. I mean, you don't go on the road with in a car with bad brakes and expect not to have an accident. I mean, that's kind of stupid or foolish. So we certainly know what the probabilities are in terms of our waste and inefficiency. And so that's kind of obvious. I mean, if you know what the risk is, then you can't, there's no argument. You can't undo the fact that risk exists by saying, well, I figured I would win. I would be the 1 in a million. Well, that's not reasonable. It's silly. It's nonsense. You can't justify yourself. It's just like a drunk driver saying, well, I've never killed anybody. I've drunk driven 368 times and I've never killed anybody, so therefore I have a right to drunk drive. I mean, it's just illogical nonsense. It's bullshit. And so we can't escape accountability just because we can't explicitly know our impact. We know what's likely to produce an impact. We know, that when we vote essentially in different ways to exploit labor in some other country because it makes we get stuff cheaper from that slave labor. It's just bullshit to say, It doesn't matter, it didn't happen, just because somehow you didn't directly do it. It was an indirect influence. Well, your indirect influence is part of the influence. That's your influence. So I guess if you didn't stop it, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution, kind of thing. So anyway, but that's where this gets higher on the level of what we can say is like a morality always implies a you have to, a demand, an ought, you must, and all that crap is focused on merely maximizing the product, maximizing the net efficiency, the utilitarian functionality, and that's what the morality is based on. It's being useful, functional, at least minimally efficient, and so law would intend to prevent the unacceptably inefficient. So, you could look at murder or theft or some other chaos that would be created to society through recklessness and bad behavior as merely an acknowledgement that that's inefficient behavior. It's dysfunctional. It's not some moral doctrine. It's a demand that you don't waste resources or you don't squander the value that's been defined as this welfare issue. And maybe part of the reason why people seem so ignorant on the subject is they don't want to live in a world where they have to meet that demand of accountability, where they have to justify their life and justify it based on realistic comparisons, and that's where we're going to fail. We're obviously demanding an awful lot to derive our satisfaction. We're high maintenance versus low maintenance. That's a good way to put it, maybe. And there's a certain immorality to being high maintenance. You're obviously wasting resources. It's obviously better, if all things are equal, to go with somebody who's low maintenance versus something that's high maintenance. So, so let's see where it goes. This is sort of where I wanted to get onto with my 10 most important facts kind of thing. This is the most important fact, is that sentience is the source of all value in the universe. There's no other rational description of anything else that could have any meaning, and there's every bit of circumstantial evidence points to the fact that this sentience thing is quite different. What we are doing in terms of feelings is quite different than what a rock is doing and the rest of the matter in the universe is doing. Spectacularly different even. And value is created like gravity or like magnetism or like some other aberrational force that exists in the universe. It exists. You might not be able to quantify it, put it in a jar somewhere and capture it, but it's describable. Its influence, its meaning, its substance is right there, obvious, and we really shouldn't have to argue about it. Really, I never thought I'd have to go on YouTube and defend the idea that suffering sucks. Come on. Atheists are really fucking dumb if they can't figure that out. If human beings need a God to tell them, and then they can't know it otherwise, they can't figure it out on their own. Oof. Spooky. So yeah. See where it goes. So anyway, I took notes, but yes, people using this word flourish, and that's a loser right there, because that's not quantum. That's flourish is like a arsenic molecule or some other well, that's the wrong way to put it, because it's not a compound. It's like peanut butter. Flourish has just got a whole bunch of elements to it, and it's complicated. It's got too much nuance, so it doesn't break it down into the core quanta of value. It's just a kind of a silly word, but what does flourish mean? Does it mean that you're starve you for a year so you really enjoy a bag of potato chips if I give you one? I mean, flourish is just too caught up in the whole addiction thing. You know, what you need, what your expectations are, you know, physically how comfortable you are. All kinds of different things will define some sort of thing flourish. And again, we don't do anything for more than 5 minutes at a time. I mean, every 5 minutes I'm in a different state of being, essentially. You know, and then within every year there's good months, bad months, there's good days, bad days, there's good hours, bad hours. So it really just doesn't say anything, flourish. I mean, flourish has to be a definition over the whole lifespan. I mean, you know, someone could say Hitler flourished, you know, for a couple of decades. But the net effect of his existence, I would argue perhaps his own existence was rather miserable. His sense of defeat and failure at the end must have been pretty miserable. And then obviously his impact on the rest of the world was complete shit. So there was no flourishing. Although you could take some isolated piece of it and say it was flourish. So flourish just doesn't work as a net word. It doesn't work in terms of describing what we do, in terms of we live a life from beginning to end that has an overall color or flavor, and then we have an impact on the world. And so flourish just doesn't say anything about that impact. So it's kind of silly to talk about whether or not you flourished personally if you flourished as a rapist. I mean, that's just silly. So yeah, fuck that word. Let's see if there's anything else while I'm here. Alright, your welfare plus your impact, yeah, equals your productivity. So that's the game. The two elements. What happens to you as a subject and what you do to the other subjects. But fuck that word, subject. Yeah, alright, well the rest of it's going to just be I won't get into the whole ambition thing, but look, you know, to me, once you start getting higher on the staircase, the 7th or 8th step is realizing that all you're just, the only thing that really does exist in the universe is a negative state, and it's just, your perception of pleasure is just an extraction of your negative state of deprivation. The wanting and the need is a negative, and it creeps into you, and it's when you release it that you sense satisfaction and accomplishment and gratification and pleasure. And that's the nature of addiction, and that's just the sad tragedy of what sentient life is doing. But there is nothing to be really accomplished. We're just chasing our own itchy ass, and it's all it's a zero-sum game, and so all we're really doing is extracting negatives. We're cleaning up a mess that should have never been made, and then we're saying we're accomplishing. Look, we're cleaning up the mess. We made the mess. And we're cleaning up part of the mess we made, and then we talk about how we're doing something valuable, and it's really quite ludicrous and silly and stupid. Alright, so anyway, better videos to come probably when I have time to actually like write notes and do all that kind of crap and such. Yeah. Alright, so enough of a video. Till next time and such.